Welcome to the Modern Husbands Podcast, where any combination of Dr. Bruce Ross, Christian Sherrill, and Brian Page host national experts who share winning ideas to manage money in the home as a team. Today we welcome Jay Zigmont, Ph.D., MBA, CFP, who is the founder and CEO of Childfree Wealth, a life and financial planning firm dedicated to helping child-free and permanently childless people. Childfree Wealth is the first life and financial planning firm dedicated to serving child-free people. Dr. Jay is the author of the book Portraits of Childfree Wealth and the upcoming book, The Childfree Guide to Life and Money. Dr. Jay is also the co-host of the Childfree Wealth podcast. On today's episode, we will discuss how couples committed to a child-free life can live their best lives. Enjoy the show.
Boy, we are thrilled to have Dr. Jay Zigmont, often known as Dr. J, and his wife is Dr. Z. Is that right?
It is. Otherwise, I'd have to be Dr. Jay-Z, you know?
Well, that's your couple name, right?
I guess so.
Dr. J, thanks for joining us today. We're really excited to talk about what it means to have a child-free life, not just for folks who are living that life throughout the duration of their marriage, but also for folks who are perhaps going to be transitioning into becoming empty nesters in the next 4 or 5 years, who are eager for some tips. And my wife and I are actually one of those couples. So let's start out with just you explaining what it means to live a child-free life.
Yeah, and from a definition standpoint, so when we say child-free, we mean never having kids. So you and your wife won't qualify.
Okay.
So it changes your life and financial plan when kids are never part of the picture. You know, the empty nest, pre-post, those are different phases of your life. But overall, you're expected to kind of follow the standard life script. The standard life script is you go to school, you get married, have kids, you put in 25 years, retire, kind of do that path.
There's those normative family stages, right?
Yeah,
Go for
in
it.
every book, it's, this is what you do. This is just what happens in life. And the interesting thing is about 25% of the U.S. are either child-free by choice or childless not by choice, and will never have kids. So when you're talking about 25% of the U.S. are going to follow a different path, it's really interesting when you find out, well, in finance and most, education, all that, it's just not even talked about. Like it doesn't exist. So that's where I come in.
And so I hear you use the term childless. So can you tell us the difference between child-free and childless couples?
Yeah. So part of this is everybody gets to pick their own term. So my wife and I, we don't have kids, whether it's by choice or not. She had a 50-50 chance of dying if she got pregnant. That kind of like made our choice for us. Mm-hmm. So do we officially go in the childless population or child-free? We use child-free. Often people use the term childless when it's not by choice, whether it's medical issues or situation or life or whatever else it is. It's a different path. And what happens is the child-free by choice folks tend to have put a thought through it and said, hey, no, I don't want to have kids. We're childless. Sometimes it's a grieving process of like the life you thought you were going to live and you're going to end up on a different path. And there's just two different paths that then converge at some point.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Can we actually, I guess, maybe even back up a little bit then and share a bit of your background and what inspired you to work with child-free couples or childless couples?
Well, yeah, we use the term child-free more than anything else. But when I was studying to become a certified financial planner, the interesting thing is there was never once a mention of the concept of being child-free. There's pre-post kids, like it just exists, but there's nothing. And it set me on this path. So my wife and I are both PhDs and we're researchers by nature. And I kind of wanted to research this. And the question I started asking was, how weird are we? Like, we're weird. I mean, like 2 PhDs sit around dinner. We'll talk about like research studies at dinner. Like, we're weird. But like,
I did that yesterday. Sat around the dinner table and talked about like the research papers I'm writing.
Right. And Brian's like, what? No,
I'm like, literally, my wife to read them though.
My wife and I started this morning. She's like, hey, I'm doing this analysis in Stata instead of R. And I'm like, that's just breakfast. We're having a discussion. But how weird are we for being child-free and living a different life? And when I started on this, I could hear the advisor, my dissertation chair was always saying, hey, if there's a hole in the research, maybe it's there for a reason. Like just because there's a hole does not mean you should research it. And I was wondering this question of like, is there a hole for a reason? Like is child-free finance just overlooked for a reason? I still haven't figured that out, but I started doing research on it, interviewing people and surveys and all that fun stuff. Wrote my first book on that. And what I found was, I actually found there's a subreddit of Our Child Free, and Reddit's got its own issues, but about 1.5 million people were in it. So I'm like, well,
it's a big subreddit then.
Yeah. I'm like, well, we're not like a small, and I didn't know the word child free existed. It's not a small group. So I started finding out, well, we're probably actually not that weird within the subset of child free folks. It's kind of always that question of what's your comparison group. And what I found was child free people live a different life, and they have different financial concerns, and they have different structures. And it's not better or worse. It's just different. I think as you dive deeper into it, you find out, like all of our software assumes you're going to have kids. All of our software has assumptions in there of life cycle. All of our systems, like everything has this. And then it's like, well, I'm kind of like feel some days like I'm swimming upstream and fighting a battle. But how do we make sure that 25% gets good advice that fits them? And that's where kind of child-free wealth and all my work comes from.
Yeah. And as you say it, and I know we've talked before, but it all makes sense. And going back and like looking at my like textbooks and stuff that I use in our personal finance class or our financial counseling and planning classes, they're all based off of that you're going to have a family and going through this kind of normative financial plan.
So I'm going to call you out on this. You just said something that's exactly my point. You said, well, you're going to have a family. My wife and I have a family. It just doesn't involve kids. But like there's like these assumptions, these words, these like things that are just all written in there that we don't even think about.
Right. Because you're only, quote unquote, a couple until you have kids, and then you transition into a family.
Well, and
kind of that maybe that normative stance. I
think
like there's a perception of that.
It's a perception. I think if you look at it in the business world, the Society for Human Resource Management looked at what it's like to be child-free at work, and they found that child-free folks are disadvantaged when it comes to like taking time off from work. Well, you don't have a family, so you don't need Christmas off. No, I have a family. I still need Christmas off. I just don't have kids. They're expected to cover extra hours because you don't have Johnny's soccer game, whatever it is. But like all of these assumptions that are built in there, and it's just interesting because when you pull it apart, you look at like the American dream. That's the 2.5 kids, the house, the white picket fence. We're saying, no, we're going to live a completely different dream. And we're not saying it's better or worse. It's just different.
I know in your, you've written about before the difference between FIRE and FILE movements. And I know there's also big subreddits and stuff about the FIRE movement. So maybe you could explain a little bit of what that is, but then what is this FILE movement as well?
Yeah. So FIRE is Financial Independence Retire Early, very popular right now. And one of the things you're finding in the FIRE community is the people that actually do retire early, it becomes kind of almost like the dog that caught the car. They're kind of like, now what do I do with the second half of my life? It's kind of like, got to my goal and what we're finding
or the next 2/3 of your life if you retire super early, right?
Yeah. It's kind of like what's next. And, for child-free folks, what we're finding is that they don't really have retirement as a goal. So this concept of FILE, live early, is more what they embrace. Where if FIRE is an on-off switch for work, FILE is more of a like dimmer switch. It's the right amount of work at the right time, the right level. And I'm going to pick on the academics in the room for a reason here. You look at a lot of academics, they get tenure and then they die in their office, at age 85, and they never.
Well,
hold on. This is so apropos.
Not a bad place to die.
I mean, but like retirement's not necessarily the goal. Like, let's cut back on work. Let's start phoning it in. I mean, but like, I can make fun of academia. I spent enough time there, but like, the FILE.
This timing is serendipitous because Dr. Ross was just tenured last week. So yes. He's already wearing, it looks like a Hawaiian shirt and shorts, showed up 7 minutes late.
I got my UK shirt.
He'll start phoning it in soon, like we'll start seeing him less and less in the office now that, it doesn't matter. But like, this is the FILE lifestyle. Like, let me do what I enjoy. Let me cut back, not make retirement a goal. And by the way, most child-free folks aren't focused on passing money to the next generation. So if I don't care about how much money I'm going to pass on and I don't want to retire, it changes just about everything in the financial plan. And what we focus on with people is saying, okay, how do we figure out what you truly enjoy and do more of that? I call it Marie Kondoing your life. Get rid of things that don't bring you joy and do things more you do. The tenure is a great example of this. A lot of people, when they get tenure, then they're like, I don't want to work on that committee anymore that I hated, because I don't have to. It's those choices that you get to make. And, I have a podcast, and one of our top downloaded episodes is I'll make you quit your job, because if you hate your job, why are you doing it? If you're like, well, to save for retirement. Well, if retirement's not the goal, why are you doing it? It starts all of these things.
It's very interesting, and it's something that it started to kind of change the way I think about I see professors, they are in their late 70s, even mid 80s, still, working. And some of them are doing phenomenal jobs still. Some of them are, as you said, phoning it in. So, but is that what you want your life to look like? And so thinking about what my life really should be is an interesting or important decision really to make. Going back kind of with this child-free lifestyle and planning, what are some of the common misconceptions, some of the different perceptions that people do have about child-free couples, especially if we're thinking about retirement, where we're thinking about our financial plans?
Yeah. So the first one that's usually where people start is they assume just because you're child-free, you're rich. You don't have kids, so the check comes flying through the mail and all of a sudden you have all this money left over.
Yeah.
The absolute truth is income disparities exist both in child-free people, parents, and everybody else. If you actually look at the national stats on net worth, the census looked at childless adults. They found that single childless adults had the highest net worth, single childless women in particular, but it was by only $2,000 higher than the next group, which was fathers. So it wasn't enough to actually make a difference.
Only $2,000. That's
yeah.
That surprises me.
Well, and that's it, Brian. People are have this assumption, well, you got all this money. Well, if you're not trying to pass off money to the next generation, there becomes a point in a child-free person's life where you can actually earn too much money, where every dollar you are earning goes towards your estate, which is not a priority. Well, if that's the case, net worth kind of going up and to the right is not a goal.
Yeah. So
I'm not surprised that child-free people's net worth is not higher. And I think there's also this expectation, oh, you don't have kids, so you need to be this top career person or whatever. This is the old school. The old school was, oh, are you going to have kids or are you going to be a career woman? That was the old school structure. You've got to do one or the other. No, you can just enjoy your life. I have an amazing amount of clients that are librarians or authors. They don't make a lot of money, but they enjoy it. There's a balancing act, and I think that there's just these assumptions that come across. And I think some of that's because some people are struggling and, there's some real issues in this country, but being child-free doesn't magically fix that. We looked at why people choose to be child-free, and finance is a high reason. About 30% of folks cited that, but it's more hey, if I had a kid, I would drown. It's not if I don't have a kid, I'm going to be rich. The way we say it is living a life of child-free wealth means you have time, money, and freedom to do what you enjoy. It does not mean you're rich. So you might have more time to do what you want, or, you have more flexibility or other things. So you make different life choices. It's not one of those things oh, I got to stay in this house because of the school systems.
Right.
Things like buying a house are a choice for a child-free person, not a requirement. In actuality, with most of my clients, I tell them to rent because they're not going to stay there long enough for the house to make sense. It's the basic assumptions get turned on their head and you have to look at everything through it. the end result for us is, for our clients, we try to plan for your life first, then your finances, then your taxes. We don't let the finances drive decision making. We say, what do you want to do? What do you want to be when you grow up? I ask all my clients that. I don't care if they're 70 or whatever it is. Like, what do you want your life to look like? And then let's optimize for that, which is just a different way of thinking about it.
So that is very different than the traditional financial planning process. Can you say those steps again? What do you focus on first, second, third?
Yep. So it's life, then finances, then taxes. And the way we like to make it all come together, we say it this way: let's make your finances simple so your life can be amazing. We're looking at, like, how do we make things so easy on the financial side that you can focus on the life side and really let the life drive it. And I'll give you an example of this. Being a landlord, so you're going to own property, you're going to rent it out, does not make your finances more simple. It just doesn't. Like, there's paperwork, there's taxes, there's all, like,
yeah.
And I've never had
tenants. There's a whole
bunch of issues. And I've never had a client tell me that being a landlord made their life more amazing. It just doesn't. It's not like, yay, I get to be a landlord. It doesn't. So if that's the case, owning rental property is not something you should do. Unless you tell me, like, hey, I love fixing up properties, I love doing this, it's part of the life. No, let's not do it. Let's figure out what life you want to live. When it comes to careers, do you move up the ladder? Well, if I move up the ladder, make more money. Awesome. Does it make your life more amazing? No. Anyone that's ever moved up the ladder knows the further you get up, the more stress, the more miserable you get.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you're now making a choice of, do I want more of an amazing life or simple finances? What I find is, as you start pulling back the curtain, kind of asking questions of why they're doing what they're doing, you find out people are like, because that's what I'm supposed to do. Like, I'm supposed to go up the ladder. I'm supposed to do this in my career. I'm supposed to, we'll pick on academics again. If you don't go on the tenure track, you don't go through the path, you don't go up the ladder, now you're associate, you have to be full professor. Like if you exit the standard script, people are like, what are you doing? And the answer is, I'm enjoying my life. And that is just countercultural. And it's against the financial planning process. People are like, well, we should start with people's goals. Awesome. Well, if retirement's not your goal, and passing on money to the next generation isn't your goal, then having more money isn't your goal. I need enough to enjoy my life. Well, that starts messing with everything else.
As a Modern Husbands podcast listener, you recognize the importance of evidence-based advice from leading national experts for your marriage. That's why we know you will love our marriage toolkit. Nearly 50 national experts came together to provide bite-sized advice to manage the toughest topics couples face in managing money in the home as a team. Go to modernhusbands.com for your free preview of our marriage toolkit to start, strengthen, or rebuild your marriage. Once again, that's modernhusbands.com to sign up for your free preview of our marriage toolkit. Now back to the show.
And your example speaks to me. I mean, I was a landlord at a rental property in a duplex, and why it was to really diversify, to save for our kids' college. And we sold it last year and we did great. And, that money we will actually never use on ourselves. It will be for our children. And all the aggravation between when we bought it and when we sold it was really, for our children. And for me, it's like, it just opened my eyes to just the reality of, like, wow, you do really look at life differently. And as you're talking, the one thing that I continue to go back to is, Hope and I are going to be empty nesters here within the next few years. And really the conversations aren't about money. The conversations are about how are we going to fill our time, because our time has been filled with our children for our entire marriage. And what does our life look like when it's not? Yeah. And I'm glad that you're bringing this up when you're talking about this, because you really do have to have a reset in how you go about your days and how you spend your money, because now the default of doing things with your kids and their friends and the events, it's over. And now maybe that's good, maybe that's bad, maybe you feel liberated, maybe you feel scared, but the reality is it's different, and you need to plan for that.
Well, and for child-free people, we actually hit that spot a lot earlier in life. So we have this concept we call the child-free midlife crisis. And what happens is, when you hit your personal, professional, and financial goals, then it's like, what's next?
Yeah.
Okay, so Dr. Ross has about 6 months before he hits this one hard. When you bet on the academic path, on the tenure track, no, seriously, I'm just calling it out. Like, you're going to get about 6 months later and you're like, okay, now I've hit my goals.
I'll mark my
Now
calendar.
No, but for parents, like, what'll happen for Brian is probably a few years down the road, it'll be like, well, what's my, generational legacy? What am I leaving for money? Grandkids, like, and what happens with parents is like your goals shift to your kids' goals. There's kind of like a default there. Well, when you don't have that answer, it's like, what do I want to be when I grow up? What's the point of life? Why am I doing it? It is the existential questions that we're answering in our 30s and 40s that many parents aren't answering until their 50s or 60s when, kids are grown and, grandkids or whatever, and it's just a different way of looking at the world. And I will tell you, one of the challenges, there's not a lot out there that tells you what to do. Like if you leave the standard script, then you're like, what do I do? What's the point? What am I doing with my life? And why do I keep doing what I'm doing? And you start asking these questions. Dr. Ross, you got any of those yet? Or we just gotten through tenure, like we haven't gotten that far?
I'm actually I'm starting to formulate some of those answers, but yeah, like you're absolutely right. I don't think it's going to take 6 months. I think it's already starting to happen of like, what's the next steps? What are my next goals? I got to reset pretty much everything now because that major goal is hit. So now what's next? You're right.
And now we go into this and say, okay, now we're part of a couple. And the question becomes, what do we want versus what do I want? And, how do we find that balance? And my wife and I, we use an approach we call the gardener and the rose, where one's providing support and one's growing, and we take turns on it. Right now, she's the rose, and, she got a job offer 1,200 miles away. We moved for her. No big deal. 5-7 years down the road, I'm going to be the rose. I want to get on a boat and travel the world. Like it doesn't have to always be work related. There's all different ways to do it. But now, when you're in that child-free midlife crisis as a couple, it's like, all right, well, am I supporting my partner on their goals? Is that my role? Is that my goal? Or am I doing goals for me? Like, do I need a different goal? Do I even have to have a goal? Like, it's all these big things. And for people that are goal driven, I find I can't get them to stop doing goals. Like I have to, they just need different ones. But I'm like, okay, if money's not your goal and a career's not your goal, what matters in life? And for some people, it's, I want to be the best gardener in the world. And some people it's, I want to learn everything about whatever. Who cares? Whatever it is, that you get to choose that. But so much of our society is wrapped around the standard life script, the money, the career, that it's like, well, what do I do? What's the point? That's that, self-actualization type questions that are hard ones.
So Brian, you got to start planning now for when you become empty nesters, I guess.
Yeah, we've been talking about it. We just got back from Hawaii, and it's not that I'm not enjoying my life as a dad, but there's also the excitement of being able to kind of as we've talked, kind of being liberated from responsibilities that are far beyond yourself. And I know obviously my responsibility as a husband is essential, but one of the things that I turn to is this book, Blue Zones. And I think there's a Netflix series on it now, but I'll never forget reading the Blue Zones, where the author's a National Geographic guy, and essentially he just travels to the world to where there are a disproportionate amount of centenarians, people that are living 100, to understand why are all these people living so long? What are they doing? And they all, despite the fact they're all over the world, in these like pockets of areas, they do have some things in common, 3 or 4 things in common. And one of them is that they always have purpose. There's always meaning. And I think what I love about the conversation today is that purpose, that meaning is not centered around kind of like these artificial goals, or I shouldn't have said that way, extrinsic goals. They're intrinsic. They're like, how can I live my life and live it fully and enjoy it and fill my time with the things that give me happiness. And I think that looking at life that way is certainly healthier as long as there's purpose behind it. Like what is it that you're trying to do? What's that next thing?
And let me mess with Dr. Ross's head, because this is just for him, for fun. By By the way, we met at a conference, so we had a good conversation beforehand, so I feel a little more comfortable beating him up than Brian. But so, all right, Brian, your obituary, the second line. How many kids do you have, Brian?
3.
Okay. The second line of your obituary will say, Brian died at this age, this location. The second line says, loving father of 3 leaves behind.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's the question for Dr. Ross. What does your second line of your obituary say?
Honestly, I don't really care if I have an obituary. So I probably expect to be cremated, and that's that.
But someone you love is going to write one of these for you, whether you want it or not.
Probably.
And the second line is really the summary of your whole life, and like this is what's on your tombstone. Like what Dr. Ross, tenured professor at the is that really the point? What is it that you're striving towards? That is the purpose. That brought to Brian's point. Like, what is that line? And a lot of people kind of give me the glib response, kind of like you did. Like, I don't care what's in there. But then you kind of start thinking about well, no, what is my impact? We're working with child-free people and saying our goal is to help child-free people figure out what they want their impact to be and then help them get there. We're not leaving a genetic legacy, but what is that? Brian, Ross-shaped hole in the world. Brian's got, here's my kids, that's my, but what's that, that space?
It'll be something with his dog.
And that's fine.
Okay, so I've got to know here, obviously not all of our listeners are child-free or childless. I mean, a lot of them are like me. They're going to be empty nesters soon. So, based on your experiences, I have a couple questions about that. And this is almost, I don't want to say it's entirely self-serving because it's for our listeners, but I'm intrigued about what you have to say here. So the first question is, what advice do you have for couples on setting new personal and joint goals after their children have moved out?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to ask, this is, Brian, this one's going to hurt for you. I apologize.
That's okay. That's all right.
So what I want you to do is pause and go, whose voice is in my head saying I got to do X? Because there's a script you've been following that says you need to do X. You need to have kids, you need to raise them, you need to there's this story, whether it's culture, family, religion, other things saying you need to do X. And once you figure out, by the way, whose voice is in your head on that, that'll set you back for a little bit. But you start having this discussion as a couple of what do I want? Who is Brian?
Yeah.
Not who is dad.
Yeah.
Who am I as a husband, not who am I a dad, who am I? And both having that conversation. And by the way, you've probably not had to deal with that for quite a while. Is that fair?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I think though, one of the things that I learned when I moved I've always lived in Ohio, and 4 or 5 years ago, I moved from Cincinnati to Atlanta, is the importance of friendship. And I had very close friends. We still, keep in touch. We still get together across the country and go to big sporting events. And I realized, I think because I was forced to be dislocated from kind of, my world, my comfort zone, is the importance of maintaining those friendships and experiences and travel. So I feel like because of that, the fast forward button on these types of questions was hit. And my wife and I know that that's what we want to do. We love doing it. We just got back from Hawaii. Next year, we're gonna go to Greece, and the kids have traveled all over the world. They've had great, but they're at the age where they're like, I don't want to, travel with you guys. I want to stay at home. I don't think they're throwing keggers or anything, because I love my kids. They're a little nerdy. I would have been throwing keggers. They're far more responsible than me. But, for my wife and I, it's how can we really soak up the time that we have together and experience different parts of the world and do it with friends.
That's awesome. And now the question becomes, all right, if we want to do more travel, we want to do more time with friends, what can you shift in your life to do that? So great example is I've been talking to a lot of folks about doing a phased retirement where maybe we're working 80% of the time or 70%.
Interesting.
Can we shift our life and our finances to then match our values? So if your values are time with friends and time traveling, what would happen if say somebody, he works 2 months, take 1 month off. And that's what he does. And 1 month off, travels with friends.
Wow.
Could you and your wife figure out something like that to get more quality time doing the things that you value?
Wow, I love that. I had never considered some sort of circumstance like that, because I don't think that we would enjoy like an abrupt conclusion to our professional lives. I feel like that we both enjoy our jobs, but I do like the idea of kind of a shift.
The technical term HR calls it a phased retirement. And sometimes it means like I cut back to 80%, or, I only work 4 days a week, or like, and people go, well, can I really do that? Like, will my employer go with that? I'm like, well, do you have skills your employer wants? And if the answer is yes, they'll do it. The academic world has a sabbatical for that reason. And, there's ways. Can I take it as unpaid time off? Whatever it is, because now money's not driving your decision making. Right. It's a question of, is your time, your money, your effort going to what you value? If that connection with friends and travel is, how do you make that shift? Because the reality check is, at some point you've earned enough money that it doesn't really matter.
Well, we love, this has been a great conversation, and we try to have everything coalesced into kind of like one simple piece of advice to bring the podcast episode to a conclusion. So knowing that, what is that one piece of simple and actionable advice for our listeners that you would like to conclude with today?
If nothing else, you just take away one thing. It's, how do you make your finances more simple so your life can be amazing? Yeah, I'm having Brian cut back his work, sell his property. Like how do you simplify it so that you can have an amazing life? And when you start pulling that apart, people go, well, why am I doing X? And I'm like, I don't know. It doesn't make your life more amazing, or does it make your finances more simple? And if you can't answer that question, you shouldn't do it.
A special thanks to our guest and, of course, to all of our listeners. Don't forget to click subscribe wherever you download your podcast, give us a rating, and share the Modern Husbands podcast with others. Doing so goes a long way in growing our reach. And join your fellow modern husbands and have links to our podcasts, articles, and other resources to manage money in the home as a team sent to your inbox every 2 weeks by subscribing to our newsletter at modernhusbands.com. Until next time, be well.